So we started with this section last week. We got just started on it a little bit. And it's a series of steps from getting to the point where you make first contact with a potential client and then work that into a point where you're able to convert that into business, which actually brings you profit and pushes you forward in your career. So the first step is capturing it. Who do you want to capture? Well, some very important things to determine in your own mind. They include buyers, sellers, niche markets, which might include high-end market, certain geographic or demographic areas. So it's important, I think, as agents to identify what these key capture points are. What do you want your business to reflect in the way of buyers? Are you more of a buyer's agent, a seller's agent? Keller Williams teaches very strongly that you should try and balance between the two, to be both a buyer and a seller, have about half of your business coming from each side. Also niche, which particular specialty do you want to take part in? So for instance, when I start farming a neighborhood, I'm going to pick the neighborhood I'm actually in because it is a rejuvenated neighborhood. It had a period of time where most of the folks were older and they were selling and retiring somewhere else. And that transition is probably half through in my neighborhood, with newer families with small children coming in behind them to buy the real estate and begin their family lives here. So I'm going to choose that specific demographic, people who are roughly in my category of age and my category of stay in the neighborhood. I've been in my same neighborhood for 21 years. And I'm going to work that angle to see how I can best make that a particular niche market for which I am well adapted, because I understand the concept of living in a house a long time, of having memories there, but at the same time, the economic realities of, is this the best thing you can do? Is stay put on all this equity, or are there better alternatives, like moving out of the area, buying 3 or 4 houses, living in one of them, renting out the other 2 or 3, and creating a considerably higher cash flow? So these are things you want to have clear in your mind, and it doesn't have to be just one. It can be multiple. You can be a buyer and a seller. You can look for niches in high-end. You might want to specialize in a certain neighborhood and a certain person type. Maybe it's along languages, maybe it's along ethnicity, and you're going to choose those for which business you're going to try and capture. So when you're capturing, you're trying to find motivated individuals, whether people who are getting ready to list their homes or people who are ready to buy a home. And so one of the things you'll see over and over again within Keller Williams shift mentality is the idea of finding a ready, willing, and able client, whether to buy or sell. And that's really important. This tells you that you've got business that is real and it's available right now. Not 2 weeks from now, not 2 months from now, not 2 quarters from now, not 2 years from now. It's right now. And there is an imperative and an urgency that needs to go with when you find these particular captures. So are they ready? Do they have a reason? Are they motivated to buy or sell? Are they willing? In other words, they're agreeable. There's no decisions to be made, no controversy about whether or not this particular course of action should be taken, and they're able, meaning that they have the wherewithal, both financially, logically, and in mindset, to carry through with a transaction. So every lead is now, future, or never. So any capture, anytime you're dealing with a lead, this is a way to categorize your lead. Now means they're ready, willing, and able. Right at the moment, this is real business right now. Get on the stick and capture it. Future means they're going to be ready sometime out there, but not quite sure when. Could be a quarter, could be a year, or anywhere in between. Perhaps it's triggered by a life event. For instance, if I were to consider moving out of the area, it wouldn't be until my two sons settle. So I have an older son who's just graduating with his doctorate and a younger son who's a third of the way through law school. I don't know where they're going to settle, but where they settle is going to be important to me about when I choose, if I choose, to trade California property for perhaps property in another state. So for me, if someone were trying to pick me as a client, they would have to know that the trigger event for me is when my sons settle in a particular area. Then the third type of lead is a never, can't be reached or asked and not able to be contacted. I've got to say, because of my neighborhood and because of the fact that I've lived there so long, I violate all of the rules about whether I should still be staying there or should have sold my house by now. And by all the rules, I should have sold my house at least 4 times over. So in considering that, I get cards and notes and all kinds of things from realtors and have for years, reaching out to find out, if I'm willing to sell. And a couple of times I've had people who were taking the personal time and they came to my door and asked me, are you interested in selling? And I was able to politely tell them, no. In fact, I made a decision back when I was 30 something that I would stay put and that I would never sell any real estate. I would buy new real estate, but I would retain all of my old real estate as income and investment. So for them, they would probably have been smart to place me on a never list because I had no intention and have so far kept that for the last 30 some odd years and haven't sold any of my real estate in California. So it's important to capture the lead and be aware of whether it's now, it's future, or it's never going to happen. Now, who do you want to capture? Who are your preferred customers? What are their profiles? And does your prospecting and marketing target these customers? So it seems pretty straightforward, but it's amazing how scattered we can get and how quickly we can get that way when we aren't sure about which particular customers we are targeting and what their profile looks like, and then whether or not we're actually out marketing and doing the things we need to do to capture that class of client. And it behooves you to take some time, along with reading the book, since this is a book club, that you take a look at that and you take some time to write it down. I'm a firm believer that the mind organizes your thoughts and actions much better when you write something down. That way you can see it, you can ponder it, you can come back to it, and you can for sure not forget it if you write it down. So take the time in your individual business to answer these 3 questions in a way that grows your business into the goals that you have set for it. So methods of captures. You put up signs for sale, coming soon. You have phone numbers on there. You have IVRs, 1-800 calls to get information about a certain place. A lot of these are a little bit antiquated. There are better ways to do this now with social media. We use an internal tool called Command, and Command does an absolutely wonderful job for the agent of categorizing your contacts in the capture stage, getting them in a database that you can remember, and then set up campaigns so that you can send out mailers, do marketing mailing, send notes, and all of that is contained within a very operational Command application that Keller Williams has developed with $1 billion and the help of Facebook and Google. Other ways which are still good, but we have problems with right now, include open houses. Open houses are problematic with COVID, but depending on who you listen to, COVID is waning. There's a certain hype in the media right now about how there's going to be a second wave. And from my relatives that are in the medical field, I can't say that I'm seeing that. So I don't know what's happening. I'm not a scientist and I don't play like I am one. But I can tell you there will be a day when open houses come back. And for a lot of folks, it's a very major way to capture clients and leads that can be translated into fulfilling goals for your business. Outbound calling is also very good. When there's the opportunity to call, meaning that the individual is not on a no-call list, be very careful about the legalities of that. But outbound calling is a good idea. It never hurts to talk to people. I am more interested to talk to someone than I am to read their advertisement. If you send me an advertisement, I'm not particularly moved to action or choice by reading somebody's postcard that they have fake print that makes it look like it was handwritten. That, not impressive. If they come to my door and they knock and they're polite, okay, that shows the person has some real interest. They're putting shoe leather to their convictions, meaning that they're actually spending the time and effort to walk around and talk to people. And I'm very likely to talk to those folks. Even if I'm not interested in selling right now, I am interested in meeting their effort with a polite and complete answer to their questions. So figure out how you're going to do the capture of the client possibilities and organize those into a database like we have for command. Phone calls. Phone calling is, I've got to say, a huge fear in some folks. So if you would raise your hand to the point of, are you an introvert or an extrovert? If you are a person who is fairly private and that you gain your, for instance, one of the easy ways to tell is take this test for yourself. You go to you've been invited to a party. It's 8 o'clock at night, it's dark. You walk up to a convention hall full of people and the party is already in motion. You don't know anybody inside and you start to open the door. As you open the door, you hear the music, you see all the people. Now the question, what's your first impulse? Is your first impulse to close the door and walk the other way? Or is it to fling the door open and walk right in because that really looks like fun? Whichever way you answer that question is usually a pretty good indicator of your outgoingness, whether you're introverted or extroverted. And for those who are extroverted, this is never a problem. I had a grandmother who would call as part of a sales role that she had in her youth, and she would constantly dial the wrong number. And then she'd talk to the people who are on the other end, and it's an accidental call, and end up increasing her business just by talking to people she didn't even intend to call. She had that gift. Me? I open that door, I look inside, and my first tendency is to turn around and walk right back out. So for those of you who are like that, and like me, then phone calling is something you have to do as an acquired skill. It takes time and effort. I can tell you that I've made more phone calls in the last 6 months in this position than I have made in the previous 60 years. So it is something you can learn. It does get fun after a while, and it's about practice. The more you practice, the easier it gets to make these kind of contacts with people that you don't know and capture clients that would otherwise never be contacted. So another thing that's really important is to systemize your capture. Put all your leads in a database. So the database I'm going to suggest is Command. If you don't have it, you need to get it. If you don't know how to use it, we can train you in how to use it. And if you're outside of Keller Williams, you might want to consider a tech demo that I can give you that will show you exactly what comes with being a client agent here at Keller Williams, the access to this great CRM. So you want to get your leads into a database. Offline, things like paper, card files, calendars, those are all okay. But any analog data like that is not subject to sorting and filtering. And it's sorting and filtering that the real intelligence comes and the power of the database. Pretty much the industry across the board realizes that technology is where things are going. You can't multiply your efforts manually in an analog world to the extent that you need to in order to be able to keep up and competitive as an agent trying to capture new client base. Online computers are important, contact management, we don't use Microsoft Outlook anymore, we use Gmail, but using a suite that integrates. so that command and the email functions and calendaring functions and all of the meeting functions we do are all tied together. That's really important. That kind of integration does nothing but save you time. And once learned, it becomes actions that you can do in a matter of seconds that if you were using a card file and a spreadsheet and a box with email, it would take you an hour to do the same thing. So be sure that you capture your client potentials in a database like command, if not command, and then you can be able to use and manipulate the data so that you can maximize your time and effort reward. So capture all your leads in your database, get everything you can, no matter where they come in. If you're in the car, figure out a way with your technology to capture those things, ask for emails. Hey, I'm in a car right now, I can't drive. Would you mind shooting me an email? That way you'll have contact information. Anytime you run into people, conversation at a coffee shop, put it on a scrap of paper, email or smartphone, referrals, all of that. You need to get those into your database. And the reason for that is it's the only way you can keep track of them over time. Now, I've got as good a memory as most people. I wouldn't say that it's great. I wouldn't say that it's bad. But I will say this, after 2 or 3 weeks of calling 100 clients a week, by the 4th week, I will lose track of a lot of them. And I won't be able to remember what happened in the transaction. That's why whenever I do any kind of personal calling at a client base, I always take copious notes. Then the problem comes, where are your notes? Did you write them in pencil? Are they here like this? And now I've got to dig through a stack of 20 other pieces of paper like this to find my notes? Or is it in a database that I can just bring up and then immediately see what the contact was, and I have notes to refresh my memory about who this individual was and what was significant about the contact and about how it will grow my business. So your capture system, here's something to stop and think about as part of the books and the things you've been reading. You want to describe how you currently capture and be brutally truthful. You know, do you take little sticky notes and stick them on your wall or paper or window? Do you write them down in a spreadsheet? Do they go into 2 or 3 different possibilities? And you have to remember, you know, exactly where they're stored. Also, how do you categorize leads? Do you categorize leads by buyer seller? Do you categorize leads beyond that by neighborhood, by school district? If you have to do all that manually without a database, you're going to miss some of the correlations, the cross connections. This individual is wanting to buy, and there's another line coming in that says they want to buy in this neighborhood, but this neighborhood has 2 different school systems. And so you have a school system coming in, and you now have 3 points to try to line up so that this particular client will find the house they're looking for and give you a reason to call them when you have one on the market. So spend some time on your own going through these and figuring out how you capture and how you can better capture the leads as they come in. So capturing is very important, but the next step is how do we connect? And connection is just as important. This is like a chain. There's the old saying that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So as you pull and put tension on that chain, being able to capture is the first link. The second link is connect. If you capture all this information, but you have no way to connect to it, then your chain breaks and you're not able to capture business. So the first thing is that speed counts. Don't think for a minute that most of what we do in connecting to clients, be they buyers or sellers, has a direct correlation to speed. Answer all your calls immediately. So I do a lot of cold calling. My average per week is between 80 and 120 calls. So I've become much better at it than I was when I started. And one of the things that I find is that when I'm calling people, especially when I'm calling agents about recruiting them to our office and to the benefits of Keller Williams, a lot of the agents filter their calls. You have to go through a Google voice manager who then wants to figure out if you're a real person. And if you are a real person, you may or may not be able to leave a message. When you leave a message, you may get a text back about, hey, I'm in a meeting right now. Let me call you later. Sometimes they call back, sometimes they don't. In my opinion, that's why you carry two phones. I personally always carry two phones. I have this phone. My gold phone is my home phone. And this phone, the red phone, is my Keller Williams phone because it's Keller Williams red. I know, that's pretty coordinated. So what are my algorithms? Well, if anybody calls on my Keller Williams phone, I absolutely pick up immediately. No ifs, no ands, no buts. I make sure that this phone gets complete attention, especially during extended work hours. This phone, I pay attention to in a completely different way. It contains contacts for my family, my mother, who's 99 years old, my sister, who is quite a bit older than I am, her husband, the rest of my family, my children are all on this phone. So when this one rings, everything is filtered out except those calls that are really important. And then I handle any other calls at my leisure on my own time. This phone is the hot phone. It's the one that I use for business, and I pick it up and answer it immediately whenever possible. So that's part of the speed, is being able to differentiate between my two phones. This one I pick up immediately. This one, it depends on who's calling as to whether or not I pick up. So just a suggestion. Other people don't like that suggestion. I know some very, very super mega agents who absolutely think that two phones is the worst system in the world. And I use two phones. It's the way it works for me. You can choose to do what you want. The key is that whenever someone calls and it's in business, that you pick up immediately. That's really important. The second thing is whenever anybody inquires you want to respond quickly. Now, literally just today, I'm under contract to buy a home in Fort Worth, Texas. And my son and his fiance are buying the home. I'm involved with it from a financial standpoint and a contractual standpoint. So I got a chance to try Keller Williams referral basis, the network that we have through KW Connect. So I made a referral to a specific agent down in the Fort Worth area. I read their profile, as we can do with KW Connect. It allows you to use a slider to suggest and then agree upon a specific cut for giving someone a referral. So in this particular case, I took the standard, which is a 25% of commission cut, and I mailed it to this, what appeared to me to be just the right tier and the right type of mega agent down in Fort Worth. I was not disappointed. Within 5 minutes, I had a response and an acceptance of that referral, began to read the inquiries to give them more and more information about the client, who is my son and my future daughter-in-law, and everything worked just like this. Now, if she'd taken a full 24 hours, I can tell you after an hour or two, I would have opened it up to 2 or 3 or 4 other agents to see who's on the ball and paying attention. So it's really important, like this agent was able to capture this referral, to be able to get back to a potential client very quickly. And 5 minutes is a reasonable period of time. And it says here, if you don't, someone else will. And that's true. We live in a right now world. The average human being is not willing to wait more than 10 seconds for almost anything, whether it's their computer to reload or a file to save, or between pushing the on button and seeing the TV show that you want to watch. We are a right now just-in-time society based on the technology as it's changed in the last 50 years. So you do want to respond quickly and be sure that becomes a hallmark of your business. You have 1 to 2 minutes to create a positive and lasting impression. So whenever you speak to someone, you want to be sure that your opening is smooth, that you're able to talk to them in a way that the tone and the content is full-featured, that it is sincere, that it's friendly and warm, and will meet their needs very quickly. You only have a very brief period of time to capture their attention and respect in order to be able to connect to that person to push forward your business. Now, the reason for the conversation could be manyfold. To identify the motivated, to set an appointment, provide customer with answers. You might want to build purposeful business relationship, move buyers to pre-approval, begin action plans. The bottom line is there's a lot of reasons to call. And the best thing you can be is friendly, succinct, meaning that you get to the point of what it is you need, you get it, and you close the conversation in a pleasant way. These are all really important parts to connect to your client quickly. And communicate in person. Whenever possible, which is not always possible, meet in person, face-to-face. If you can't meet face-to-face, use Zoom. It's much better than just an audio call. If you can't use an audio call, use IM. At least it's a conversation. If you can't use IM, use email. And notice in this list, I've moved from most personal to least personal, more real-time to less real-time in that list. So the closer you can get to face-to-face conversation or simulate face-to-face conversation, the better the communication is. So ask smart questions. Use a lead sheet to determine the motivation, the features, price, agent, financing, contact information. In other words, have this in a system. Whether it's a form or a template, you want to be able to gather this information in a systematic and quick fashion. But at the same time, you don't want to sound like you're a couple of detectives and you're interrogating an individual for a suspected crime. You don't want to sound like that. You want to sound friendly, but to the point. People almost always respect the fact that you respect their time. If you're careful to do that, you'll find the relationships and the trust and communication goes way up. So in the process of connecting, you want to have sample questions for the buyers. This is important. The sample questions might include, what are you looking for in your dream home? What's prompting you to move? These are all things that vet out the kinds of information that you need in order to help them make a selection. And there's others that are not on this list. Part of it may include, how are decisions made? One of the mega agents that I work with all the time has an interesting question he always asks. And the question is, who all is involved in the financing and the selection of this home? So maybe it's just a couple, but maybe it's a couple plus an extended family of one or multiple families, of one or multiple generations that are going to be involved in the decision process of whether or not to buy and at what price, or whether or not to sell and what price. It's important to know that, because when you get to the decision making, it's imperative that you have everyone involved in that decision who is the decision maker or contributes to it is able to all get in the same room so that a decision can be made effectively. If it requires it to jump from a couple to each of their parents and some of their grandparents and maybe an uncle and maybe a family business, and you have to do that at each step of the way, this is going to take a very long time to gather a decision that could be made if you got all the decision makers determined at this point where you're making a connection, and then have them in the room for the decision itself. Pre-approval is really important. I remember the transition from basically 25 years ago. Sometimes I used to go out and look at real estate for giggles, and I would find an agent and they would drive me around and show me houses. And I'd either come home thinking about maybe buying a new house, or I'd come home very glad that I had the one that I had. And there was no talk of pre-approval or anything like that. Now, agents are so busy, especially right now, because we're experiencing a flood of demand that's coming in after the quarantine and the shelter in place. So business is booming right now. And you will find that being able to to have an idea of who the decision makers are, what their price range, have all this information cataloged so that you can move quickly and efficiently will help you close more business because time is more likely to be a limiting factor right at the moment than being able to get the business. So sample questions for sellers might include, what's the address of your home? That's pretty basic. What's prompting you to move? Always important, is this a slow move or a long move? In the house that is under contract that I'm working on in San Antonio or Fort Worth, Texas, one of the things that is very important is that the seller is an older couple and they are selling this home in Fort Worth to move to be closer to their children that live in Austin. So there's a number of factors about timing for the move and how quickly they move and whether or not they have the money in hand already under contract for their sale so that they know what price range they can afford on the buy. So all of those are very important things you need to vet out early in the process of connecting to your client. Ask for an appointment. This is where those of us who are more timid need to be more bold. So if you ask, it says you have a 50-50 chance of a yes. Maybe, maybe not. It is a binary answer. It's a yes or no, meaning there's 50-50 chance, yes or no. But in my experience, yes is not fully 50%. It's something quite a bit less than that. But it doesn't hurt to ask for an appointment, and you have to do it because the one thing for sure is if you don't ask, you won't get the appointment. So ask in a nice way, be as charming as you possibly can be, and it'll come out how it comes out because it's beyond your control how they answer. Offer a solid reason to meet. I would like to meet because I'd like to present to you what value I supply and our company supplies and our office supplies in the process of making the biggest financial decision you'll probably make in your life. And we are here and we're not Kmart. We don't just leave you to your own devices. You can use arguments like, Redfin. Everybody says, oh, Redfin, I can just put it. Yeah, and Redfin has about a 15% below market history of pricing their homes. And you show them what 15% of a $2 million house is, and suddenly you've got their attention about why your commission might actually be a great deal. These are all things that are important to point out in an appointment and why it's important to talk a little bit about them so that they're more likely, the client is more likely to go ahead and make that appointment with you. Always try to be as accommodating as you can for time and place, but at the same time, push for a date. And don't let it go very far out. Now, this one's always been hard for me because I always thought, you should let people kind of choose. Maybe they don't want to talk for a week or two. It's not the way you do this. The best way to do it is to propose a time and a place today, if possible, if not tomorrow. Today or tomorrow, those are the only options you give. And then if there's some reason that they can't, they'll tell you when the first opportunity is, and you take the very first and earliest possibility that they present to you as an option. You want to stay focused on uncovering the needs and respond to what their needs are. They may be, hey, we're an older couple and we've lived in this house for 38 years and we've raised 6 kids here. And you know what? We've never, ever used a trash bin in front of our house for anything. So what can you count on? They've probably got a lot of stuff. It's going to take time and effort and help to get through all the things that need to be sold, moved, or thrown away so that the house can get ready for the market. And it's important to help people who are not in the business. Agents know how to do this stuff. Homeowners don't. Frequently, a homeowner who has not moved for 5, 10, 15, 20 years has absolutely no clue about who to call and how to get an appointment. So it's really important to be able to focus on that and get that appointment set up so that you can move forward. Be sure to capture all the information in your database, get it into command straight from the time it happens. If you delay, you will forget things. You have to do it in real time as soon as the conversation is over. So in your system, You need to connect. And how do you connect? Well, describe your current system of how you connect with your leads, and then critically look at it yourself, and then maybe talk to the agent that sits next to you, if you're friends with them in the office, and say, hey, this is what I do to connect with my clients. What do you think? Does it sound like it's the best way to do it, or is there a better way to do it? And that's an important thing to be able to do. That brings us to the third step, where we're going to start cultivating these clients into becoming leads. Okay, so the benefit of cultivating is you cement a relationship through action plans. You want to be in top of the mind, meaning that you want to be the first person they think of when they're getting ready to make a decision to buy or sell. You want to provide a continuous value. One of the things I've seen agents do very effectively is send out monthly newsletters. I used to read those even though I had absolutely no interest in selling my house. So why was this agent constantly on my mind? Because they always sent me this newsletter, and it told me about market conditions and economic conditions. And that's really important. Why? Because there's not a human being alive who owns a home who doesn't wonder how much it's appreciated this month. It's a good thing to know. If you bought your house at $278,000 and it's now worth $1.4 million, I want to know when it goes to 1.5. Am I going to sell? No. But I'll definitely read what that agent puts out. And if something changes and I do want to sell, guess what? That's the agent that's going to be the first one on my mind. That's that top of the mind status. You want to provide that value by sending mailers like that, doing touches that are meaningful. Prioritize your communication so that you keep the motivation up and increase the opportunity to close to appointment. So all very important to cultivate that relationship that's going to ultimately result in business. Step 3 is close to an appointment, action plans, what you're going to do for touches, how you're going to consistently be able to keep yourself in the top of the considerations. You can read more about this on your course page 30. Tools. So for lead generation, if you have 36 months and you do 12 calls on each of those over that period of time, you will result in at least 3 leads that become real business. Ask for an appointment. Always ask. It's very important. We already talked about that a little bit. Have several scripted questions that you can move through. And I say always with script, in order to be able to avoid being canned, in order to be also able to be natural and really transparent and sincere about it, take the scripts that you look at, especially provided by KW, and make them your own. There's no reason not to do that. I've taken several scripts that when I use them just exactly word for word, I have trouble with it. They don't flow right. But I've rewritten them to accomplish the same goals in my own words with a little bit different logic, than I found that they became very effective. So don't be afraid to edit scripts so that it fits you and it fits the purpose you're trying to fulfill. Likelihood of meeting places, 50% come to the office, 25% meet nearby for coffee, 25% will meet at their home. These are all good. Right now, you've got some limitations about coffee shops and you've got some limitations about home. You have some restrictions, but you can bring them to the office now. And we have precautions with disinfectant washes. We have our masks that are available in the office. And you probably can't see this very well, but there is a big piece of plastic right here. You can probably see the reflection moving around. And you can see it's tied up there to the ceiling so that we can use the conference rooms, but we have protection according to the county health department and making our place a safe place to do business. So we can do that again in the office. Remember that you update your database, you keep notes on every conversation and transaction so that even if you're running 5 or 6 clients at the same time, you won't make mistakes and confuse details about one client with another. There's nothing that makes us appear to be incompetent quicker than not being able to keep data about our clients correct. So, your cultivation system, what kind of a system are you currently using? And how do you cultivate those leads? Drip campaigns using MailChimp in conjunction with Command works really well. I have a series of about 7 different major tracks based on the type of client that I'm trying to cultivate, and I intermix them with live calls and then specific emails that reinforce and try and cultivate this client relationship. Be sure that you are anticipating the changing needs of your leads. Things happen. COVID happened. It's massively changed some people's plans. Back in March and April, when the stock market tanked, all of a sudden, one whole class, major class of buyer disappeared overnight. And those were high-tech workers who are going to use stock options or PDUs in order to be able to pay for their home. And suddenly, when the stock went like that, just dropped like a rock, that market, those people who were buyers just disappeared. And the reason for that is because the money disappeared. Nobody who has stock options or is going to ever sell when they're low. That's just horrible. But the valley is rebounded. I have a close friend who is still at NVIDIA, and wow, theirs took a huge dip, but it's back up. In fact, in the last week or so, it's hit an all-time high. So the 20 to 30 somethings that are looking to buy their first home who disappeared in March or April are now back with major motivation because their stocks are flying very high. So watch for those kind of changes and incorporate them into your cultivation. So when the stock market goes up, you have a client you know and it's in your database that works at NVIDIA. Guess what you should be doing? Sending them a congratulations email that says, wow, here's what I saw the stock was as an NVIDIA. That's fantastic. Congratulations. When you're ready to buy that house, let me know. We've got some great things on the market, and show them a couple of things. All very important in the cultivation process. The next step is to convert. And this is the one that if it falls apart, the first 3 don't matter. Because until you get it to the point where it actually results in live business, then it's pointless. So conversion takes skill. You have to know your market, know what's happening in the world economically, the national, world level, at a region, all the way down to a county and a neighborhood. You literally need to be able to see the entire stack because people are hearing all kinds of things in the media. Left media, right media, center media. All the media is got its own purposes and it's telling you all kinds of things which may or may not be true of the specific market that you're in. So you need to know your market on a local basis and know what's happening. Now, just by listening to the news, I didn't know what was going on in Fort Worth. I assumed that Fort Worth, Texas being Texas, has a very volatile market for real estate. It always has, back even 30 years ago. So I wasn't sure what was going on. But when I started investigating, I found out through broker metrics in the Dallas-Fort Worth area exactly what's going on in the market. And in the media, I was seeing that Fort Worth, Texas, it's all crashing. No, it's all going to be doom and gloom. And then you look at the market statistics, and it was exactly the opposite. The market in Fort Worth right now is white hot. And these are the kinds of things that you need to use to help convert your leads that you've cultivated and you've identified and got in your database, and you convert them into business. That's one of the ways you do it. Be data-oriented, numbers-driven. There's a phrase I use a lot. My oldest son graduates this month with a doctorate degree from UC Davis, and it involves mathematical modeling of DNA and RNA looping. It's kind of an interesting scientific field, but somewhere when he was still an undergraduate working on a degree in applied math, I noticed our debates at the dinner table changed. They went from my opinion, your opinion, and then all of a sudden everybody looks up stuff and tries to get facts out of search engines or Wikipedia, to a different argument. And the argument became, Dad, there's no reason to argue about this. It's math. It's math, Dad. Just do the math. That was a whole different kind of discussion and argument when things boil down to math, because math, certainly at its lower and middle levels, is pretty absolute. Now, when you get into real advanced math, you find out there's no such thing. But in the middle, and for where most of us live in our math lives, it's very concrete. So being numbers driven, knowing the math and using the math to make the conversion is very important. So be sure when you go to an appointment and you've got a meeting that this math is on the tip of your tongues and you're not stumbling around through paper and your PC trying to find it. Have it on the tip of your tongue, on the front of your brain, and ready to present it when you meet with your client. Conversion rates. Calculate your conversion rate based on a number of factors. One is the total number of leads. So how many leads do you have? And how often do you convert them? These kinds of things are important primarily because you want to be able to understand when a shift happens. Now, let me give you an example. Over the last basically 4 months, when I do cold calling on a potential client list, I see about 1 meeting out of every 15 to 20 calls. It's been pretty consistent. But I noticed in the last 2 weeks that 1 meeting that was able to be arranged for in 15 to 20 calls now takes 100 calls. That's a huge difference. And when I noticed that, I realized I was going to have to shift tactics because something had changed. And what I eventually figured out changed was, number one, the people I was talking to were being canvassed by a lot of other agents that were interested in converting that individual. So they were kind of suffering from burnout. They heard one too many recruiting calls. They just weren't interested in listening. The other thing that happened is, in this particular case, I talked to a lot of agents, recruiting them for Keller Williams, and I suddenly found out that everybody is busy, massively busy. This tidal wave that is built up bigger and bigger behind the shelter-in-place order burst, and all of that demand came rushing forward. And agents are so busy, they don't have any time but to take clients and move transactions along. So keep track of these type of statistics. Some of them you can affect by being better at it with time. Others you'll find the reason to keep track is, if I hadn't known that my conversion rate was about 1 in 15 to 1 in 20 calls, when suddenly it went to 1 in 100 calls, I'm not sure I would have noticed as quickly. But it became very quickly apparent that, wow, things have changed and I have to change my tactics. Don't lose any leads. Every lead is precious. And the reason for that is it's hard to get them. And when the lead is hard to get, it's very important that you don't waste all of that time you spent cultivating it and then you lose it in the conversion process. It doesn't generate business for you. Be sure that you focus on conversion. Be sure that if you have a staff, that it's focused, that when you get to the conversion state, that's where you really zero down tight and you make your priority to make that conversion. I will say that once you have done the identification and you've cultivated the lead and you've done the other 3 steps, this one is the highest priority. Why? Because you've already invested time and effort in steps 1 through 3. If you miss step 4, that was all a waste of time. So concentrating on step 4 very, very tightly when the time comes is absolutely essential to making the conversion. So there's a decision continuum, and within Command, you have an ability to categorize leads in this kind of a way. You've got everything on one end of the continuum of absolute no, this person's not going to buy, they're not going to sell, there's no way they're going to ever convert into business, to an absolute yes, they're ready, willing, and able right now to sign on the dotted line. And those are the ones you've got to be ready to convert right then. And then you've got everything in between. So it's important to realize that every lead you get should be prioritized based on this kind of a table. Okay, reasons why sellers are not right. Well, it's not a good seller. They're not really motivated to the price correctly. They may not be motivated to get the property in good selling condition, no urgency to get out of the house. All of these can be factors. You've got to determine on what they are and how they impact the business and how much effort you should put in on it. So preparing a property, let me again go to people who've been in a house for a very long time. Preparing a property for sale may be more trouble than it is to just stay put. Why? Because trying to clear out 20 years of collecting stuff, and especially if the sellers are older, is daunting. They don't even want to think about it. I used to kid years ago about if I ever moved from the house I'm in now where I've raised my children, it's full of all kinds of mementos of 20 years of child rearing. The only way I could move is with a match. Just burn it, because there's no way I'm ever going to be able to prep that house for sale. Now, actually there is, but it's a very daunting thing. So being able to figure out why sellers are not right at the moment and being able to have answers can take them from there, they're not ready, to the point where they are ready right now. Reasons buyers aren't ready. They aren't ready financially. The stock just crashed. So all the money they were going to use is no longer available. They need to sell a house. So these are the contingencies about one house has to be bought and sold in order to be able to make the next one. Or they all need to be able to get out of the house in a time sequence. The best one of these I ever saw in my whole life, the second house that I owned, moving to the third house that I owned, was an absolute masterpiece. I worked with an agent in Ahmedin Valley, and that agent's name was Rick Crowley. I'm sure by now he's retired, but he did the unthinkable. There were 3 people involved. The first house, my house, and then the house I was moving into. And it had to be a 3-way coordination so that closing and moving all occurred on the same day. And for the moves, the move had to be out in the morning, and then the other house had to be ready to move in the afternoon. It was a 3-house deal, and he pulled it off. It was an absolute masterful job of being a super agent. Rich was very active in Ahmedin Valley for decades. So you pay attention to those. You need to make sure that you're able to supply what's needed to make a deal go through. If they're not motivated, there's things you can say. Like right now, if somebody's not motivated to sell a house, it's pretty straightforward. Look where society is right now. Look at our domestic turmoil, and now look at a November election. Whichever way that election goes, it's very possible the economy is going to tank and house prices may drop like a brick. Now, they also may not, but it's something to consider as a risk in helping a buyer or a seller to motivate to make a decision. And then there's some folks that just can't make a decision, and that's just the way they're wired. They're not made to make a decision. I used to teach Western civilization when I was in graduate school. I taught an undergraduate class, and Queen Elizabeth I of England was noted for something called the Elizabethan settlement. And the Elizabethan settlement was this: she hated to make decisions. So what she did was she just didn't make a decision. And the circumstances of what was happening that was driving the decisions would fall out one way or another way. And she didn't really care. At the end of the day, by not making a decision, she made a decision. And of course, that's also the same as a buyer or seller who's not motivated or can't make a decision. If they can't make a decision, that is a decision. If it's a buyer that's not sure they want to buy, it means they're not a buyer. If it's a seller that's not sure they want to sell, then it means they're not a seller. So you have to kind of point this out, work with them. Be sure to get the decision makers in the room at the same time, because outside, if there's another factor coming into the decision, it becomes harder and harder to make. So I hope this has been helpful. I've enjoyed teaching this segment. Next week, we'll pick up with slide 42, and we'll work to the end of this section and probably start into the next section. So thank you for attending. Have a lovely afternoon and a very productive day. Bye-bye.